Hello fellow travelers and welcome to another episode of In-Depth Boss Guide series, where we take a closer look at the VATS major threats. I'm too lazy to be awesome, and this time we face the Cryo Regisvine, also known as Cryo Flower. First thing you can notice is that the boss doesn't move. It only rotates to face your character, which makes summoning abilities or the ones that deal damage in a fixed area extremely efficient. Normally, Regisvines have highly increased resistance to all damage. These buffs are removed while the boss is stunned. In order to stun it, you should break its weak point, which game hints you about first time you face it. And overall, this is exactly the ideal strategy for the fight. Break a weak point, deal damage, repeat until the boss is dead. Cryo Flower has two weak points, its cores, one at roots and another at corolla. The second one appears after the first one has been destroyed. The root core will reform in about a minute and a half after being destroyed, so even if you lack damage and the boss is still not even close to dying after 2 stuns, just focus on dodging its attacks and you will get another chance very soon. Of course you can try defeating it without stunning, but keep in mind that your damage will be drastically reduced due to boss high resistance values. Now how do we break those cores? First thing to note is that your stats or damage don't matter. What matters is what you attack the core with. Different attacks deal different amount of damage to the core. Secondly, the corolla core is twice weaker than the one at the roots. And lastly, for frequently hitting attacks such as normal attacks, additional effects triggered by them, or skills with multiple hits, there is a short internal cooldown which makes it so not every single hit deals damage to the core. Now, since going through all of the attacks would be painful and more to be added with new characters, I'll just try to explain the main principles and highlight some combinations worth considering. You can damage the core with elements that react with cryo. Those are Pyro, Electro, Geo and Animal. Pyro works best. Electro is generally twice less efficient than Pyro. Geo and Animo are generally twice less efficient than Electro. Animo also have a weird interaction, being able to deal damage only twice. I suppose it's just a bug, but the damage is low anyway, so relying on Animo damage is not even worth it in the first place. Out of physical damage, you have to rely on so-called blunt damage. It's basically things that can deal significant damage to ores, such as claymores and plunging attacks, but their damage is also very low, similar to Geo or Animo. So here's what you might consider using. All of the damage numbers I'm gonna talk about work for the root core. Remember that the corolla one is twice as weak. If for some reason you can't use Pyro characters, your only decent option so far is Razor. Using his burst you can destroy the core fairly quickly, but there are certainly much better ways to do so. Another thing worth mentioning is that Animo still can be useful. Although Animo itself deals almost no damage, Pyro-infused swirls will remove 1/3 of core's durability, and this might be a simple way to add more damage if you bring Pyro anyway. Now to the Pyro itself. Xiangling works great here, but probably not why you think she does. Her burst can't damage the core past first hits during animation, but Guoba on the other hand is relentless. He can break the core in 6 hits. Unfortunately, he only does 4 attacks, hence the low place for Xiangling, since you have to bring something else to finish the job within short amount of time. But the ability to remove 2/3 of HP with a single button is still worth considering. Speaking of something you can bring, Bennett is a fine addition to your team. He only needs 3 hits with his skill or burst to destroy the core. His skill has very short cooldown, so even bringing him alone is enough to deal with the core with ease. I don't suggest to charge his skill though, because the damage of subsequent hits is very low, but skill's cooldown will be increased. Not to mention that being hit during cast interrupts the combo. If you are looking for the character that can deal with the core on their own, you might consider Yanfei. Although it might seem like her attacks deal low damage, simply mashing any of her attacks or just spamming charge attack will get the job done very quickly. And our winner is Ember. Although her skill is pretty much useless, her burst on the other hand simply destroys the root weak point. It's not as effective when it comes to dealing with the Corolla weak point, but her charged attacks are still a decent way to deal with both. Last thing to mention here is that once you break Corolla core for the first time, it will become the weak spot of the boss for the rest of the fight, forcing aimed attacks to deal critical damage when you hit it. I could pretty much stop at this point, because now you should be able to keep the boss stunned for the most of the fight. But let's see what it can do to you anyway, just to be safe. Cryo Regisvine doesn't move during a fight, so your position often determines which attacks you can expect, although some of them are triggered by other factors. Each attack has a clear unique indication, such as highlighting different parts of the boss or specific movement prior to the attack, so you will be able to recognize each of them in advance once you get familiar with the fight. One of the common attacks is Faceplant. Boss slams its Corolla into the ground, releasing 3 ice trails in a fan shape. Boss will stop following you while it's charging Faceplant, so if you stand in melee range, you just have to move slightly left or right to avoid it. The further you stand from the boss, the harder it will be to move away from this attack, because its AoE expands, but you can always rely on dashing iframes as well. Sometimes boss will cast this attack 3 times in a row. In that case, it will lift its Corolla slightly faster after the first slam instead of staying on the ground. And it's good to know that each hit doesn't actually aim at you. Instead, boss only rotates slightly towards you, so you can run behind it to avoid the entire combo. Second common attack is Ice Beams. Boss will fire 2 beams intersecting at your position. Sometimes boss will do this 2 times in a row. Each of the beams moves in a straight line, so with dash you can either move away or rely on iframes to avoid damage. One of the specific attacks is Flail. This attack is only triggered if you stand behind the boss, no matter how close you are. In attempt to face you again, Cryo Flower will turn around with a swipe. Its range is short, so you can easily move away from this attack if you have to, or just time your dash right if you want to stay close. Once you break the root weak point, boss will start performing frontal flails as well, as a part of Flail-Flail Faceplant combo. But since you know how to deal with all of those, it shouldn't be a problem. Another close range attack is Spin. It's an AoE attack which hits everything around the boss. This attack can be triggered if you stand close to the boss, but it has a pretty long cooldown. Your best action is to dash away from it. Prior to this attack, you will see a circle around the boss indicating its range, but the actual attack radius is slightly bigger than the shown circle. After the spin, the ground around the boss will become infused with cryo, dealing damage to characters standing on it. This infusion persists for some time, forcing you to stay away from the boss, although you can ignore it with enough healing. Note that if you break a weak point while the ground is infused, you won't be able to safely attack the boss with melee characters. Homing Icicles, on the other hand, is the attack that is only used if you stand far away from the boss. It will fire 2 sets of 4 icicles with a short delay. This can be repeated up to 3 times. The best way to avoid them is to stay closer to the boss. This way icicles will simply hit the ground trying to reach you. But if you can't stay near the boss, just dash away when they come close for the first time and keep running around. Icicles lose their homing ability after a few seconds, so you will manage to run away eventually. If you were unable to destroy the core for about a minute, Cryo Flower will rage out and cast Blizzard. It will start forming huge numbers of ice shards all over the arena. Most of them will try to hit you, but some will be scattered randomly. Each shard will then explode in a couple of seconds after forming, leaving Cryo Puddle that will deal damage if you step on it. You can stop the attack by destroying the weak point, but boss also uses Spin right before casting Blizzard, further limiting available space and protecting itself, so you might want to just wait it out before stunning the boss. It's very easy to avoid any damage during Blizzard. All you have to do is to keep running around the arena. In most cases, you should be able to avoid everything even without sprinting. Every time Cryo Regisvine wakes up after being stunned, it will perform an improved version of Flail, with the only difference being that the boss performs a swipe in a full circle instead of just a half. If stun was caused by breaking its root weak point, this will be followed by Rotary Spray, perhaps the most dangerous attack in boss arsenal. Cryo Flower will lock onto your character, preparing to fire a Cryo Ray which deals massive damage. It will then do a full rotation with it, dealing damage and infusing the outer portion of arena with cryo. At first it might seem tricky to deal with, but actually boss stops following you slightly before unleashing the spray. This gives you enough time to run away from it. And then you can see a slight twitch right before boss starts rotating towards you. Once rotation starts, you can dash through the spray to avoid damage. Now when we know how to avoid damage, let's decide what should be the most efficient way to deal it. Let's look at what we know so far to decide what can be your best bet when it comes to fighting Cryo Flower. Cryo Regisvine has highly increased resistance to cryo, which makes cryo damage ineffective. It's not completely useless since you can still use it to trigger Melt to boost Pyro or Superconduct to increase your physical damage output, but relying on cryo as your main source of damage is not the best idea. Pyro, on the other hand, makes the fight much easier, because pyro attacks make short work of boss weak points. And since this is the best strategy for the fight, bringing it is highly recommended. Also, you should be careful with using Hydro characters. Some of their skills apply wet status to you. Since boss attacks you with cryo, this might cause you some trouble. Other than that, there is nothing affecting character's performance when it comes to elements. But when it comes to weapons, it's not that simple to decide which one is better. Staying in melee range will make it easier to avoid Cryo Flower's attacks, but with melee characters you won't be able to safely deal damage after the spin attack, unless you have some good healing. Mages still can stay in melee range to have easier time avoiding damage, but unfortunately their attacks don't aim at the Corolla weak point unless the boss lowers it, so the only thing that differs them from melee characters is the fact that they can move away and still deal damage if necessary. With archers, it's better to not stay close if you rely on charged attacks, because aiming limits your view and it's hard to see what the boss is doing if you stay close. Just don't stay far behind this line to not trigger Homing Icicle's attack and you'll be fine. On the other hand, archers can reach Corolla core anytime and use damage bonus from hitting the weak spot during stuns, but it might take you some practice to get used to dodging attacks with limited view in aiming mode. But to be honest, all of that is pretty much irrelevant. When it comes to the fight, you can stun the boss twice every 90 seconds. Each stun lasts for 15 seconds, which leaves you only a minute of actual fighting instead of just beating the boss up, so feel free to bring whatever suits you best. There are no specific characters you should use, but do bring something to deal with the cores as fast as possible. Since boss doesn't move, some abilities become more effective, such as summons, skills which deal damage in a set area, or ones which create an area for you to stay in. Using what we've learned makes fighting Cryo Flower a walk in a park, so let's take a look at some challenges we should try completing. There are 2 achievements related to Cryo Regisvine that you can earn. Well, technically there are 4, but here we'll only look at the ones worth discussing. For the first achievement, you have to defeat the Cryo Flower without breaking the core in its Corolla. You still can stun the boss by breaking its root weak point, and if you don't have enough damage to defeat it within a single stun, you can wait for the weak point to reform or simply deal the rest of the damage without stunning the boss. But if you go for the latter, be careful, because the most difficult part here is actually to not break the second weak point by accident. For the second achievement, you have to break boss Corolla weak point during Rotary Spray. This might seem challenging since time is very limited and the attack itself is quite scary, so you probably also would like to dodge it. But actually, you can do it very consistently if you know the right setup for it. I'll show you the easiest ways I found to do so, and if you know more, feel free to leave them in the comments. The first way is to trigger 2 pyro-infused swirls. For that, you need to rely on animo abilities, which can be infused with other elements. For example, one simple combination that everyone has access to is Channeling and Animo Traveler. Your goal is to infuse Traveler's skill with Pyro and keep it up long enough to trigger 2 swirls. So here's the algorithm. First, apply Pyro to the boss after it wakes up with a flail attack. Second, avoid Rotary Spray. Then hold the skill until the boss falls again. This also works with Animo Bursts of Traveler, Sucrose, Kazuha and Venti. But if you do it with bursts, it's safer to use them before Rotary Spray, otherwise they might get infused with Cryo instead. Another way to do this is with Yanfei. Her burst almost destroys the Corolla weak point, so all you have to do is to activate her burst to avoid Rotary Spray and use one normal attack to finish the job. And the last way for those who have friends. In order to break the Corolla core, you have to attack it 3 times with Yanfei's normal attack. And the thing is that cooldowns preventing attacks from dealing damage to the core are not shared between different players. So if you have at least 2 friends, you can easily break the core simply by attacking it together. That's all I have for you this time, fellow travelers. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you'll have a nice day and I'll see you in the next one.